I am a writing tutor. Ooh, I live in Trip, so if my lights go off, that's why. I'm a writing tutor at the Learning Resource Center. My major is elementary education, and I have a double minor in special education and human development.
My name's Alexis. I'm in my very last semester here at Barron. I am an IE major, industrial engineering, and I've actually recently accepted a position with WabTech. So I'm very excited for that, excited to wrap up my Barron experience and begin, the next phase of my life.
All right, so for today, I'm going to be handling kind of the humanities area of the note-taking process and just some strategies about it. And then Alexis is going to be doing more of STEM and mostly engineering focused. So if nobody has, Ruth, do you have anything you want to throw out there before we start?
No, I think you're both doing a great job so far, so keep on rolling.
All right, so then I'll get us started then. So my first on the agenda is just going to be a couple general technologies when it comes to note taking. And the hard thing about that is you're not really going to know what's going to work for you until you try it out a bit. So it's going to be a little bit of pass and failure when it comes to that, but you just have to try out different things. Now that we are in mostly a Zoom world, note-taking has transformed a lot. So there's a couple of more electronic options that we have now that we didn't before. And I showed Ruth and Alexis this, and I was really excited about this. It's like a brand new notebook that I got. It's a notebook, but it's also for like iCloud, and you can hook it up to Google Docs. So it's called the Rocket Book, and it's extremely thin, and it comes with like 20 pieces of paper. So basically what you can do is you can write notes on it, things like that. And it comes with an app, and you take a picture of it and upload it to the cloud, which is really useful when you don't want to walk around with 30 giant binders along with textbooks and then keeping stuff for when you have your career for notes to look back for. Things like that are really good. And I know that we are in college, so lots of people are broke right now. So something like this is a really good investment. And I think I spent $50 on this, which long run with buying like binders, paper, and things like that really pays off in the end, and you probably end up saving more. But technologies like that are really useful in note-taking when it comes to organizing, having less things to go through, and having things online to look at your screen while your professor's doing stuff is really useful in a Zoom world. Some other points, using your computer obviously is a huge benefit now with taking notes. Using Google Docs, Words, there's a web application that you can go on. If you go into Google and you type in Google Webs, what it does is it makes a mind map. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but basically if you have like a topic you're talking about, so I'm an education major, if we were talking about like autism or something, it would be the center circle would be autism, and then I would branch out with notes of my own. So we could focus on how it affects the child, the teacher, the parents, and then branch off from those ways. So they have online applications for those as well. They just came out with a couple of new things. It's called Remarkable 2. Probably nobody has heard about it, but it's like really cool. It's kind of like an iPad and Kindle mixed together. And basically what you do is you can't do anything except work, so you don't get distracted. So you can download PDFs and you can write on them, and you can make separate files and applications for that, which is also a really nice way to organize. So those are pretty much generally the electronic ways to carry information. Traditional ways obviously would be like notebooks, binders, little writing pads if you have, or journals, bullet journaling. I know it's like aesthetically pleasing and everything, but it also does really help to organize your things nicely. So I would at least try one of these or multiple of these at least once, just to see what works best for you, because note taking isn't the same for everybody. Everybody has a different way they like to do things. So it's a personal preference when it comes to things like that.
Is anybody using electronic, any kind of technology for your note taking beyond, say, Word doc?
And feel free, if you want to type in the chat box, you guys should all have access to chat. You can feel free to turn your microphone off. Or if you want to turn your cameras on too, we want to encourage that.
Okay.
Oh yeah, that's a really useful one to use too. I like those. Because it's just nice to be able to actually write on a PowerPoint or something like that and use the tools that you have from professors, and then using your own tools to integrate them too, I think helps a lot.
All right, well, I can start. I'm going to kind of break some of my tips into kind of more the type of notes that we see, at least over at the STEM side of Barron. So typically, I'm going to start with like guided lecture notes. Typically, in engineering and in your math courses, you'll get a PDF or something uploaded onto Canvas. You know, they'll have blanks all over your notes. They'll have spaces to do problems in and things like that. And I typically will always print these out because I'm a traditionalist when it comes to note taking. So I print them out and I use a pencil typically to take notes because there's a lot of changes to make most of the time. There's a lot of little extra things to write and margins and things like that. So I typically use a pencil when I'm doing it in class or from the lecture videos. And then in order to review, I go back with pens or colored highlighters, and I'm able to star things that maybe I need to ask a question about in the next lecture or office hours. And then I also will underline or circle the main topics or, you know, big equations that I need to memorize if I'm not given an equation sheet. And then I also like to add my extra notes and stuff in the margins. Typically, when you print it out, it has those nice inch margins on the top and on the side. So I like to write my questions there. I like to write extra tips that the professor gives. I like to write little like clues to get to the next step of the problem, different rules and things in like math classes, for instances, there's special limits or special derivatives and things that are very helpful to have in your margin that kind of like stick out. So that way, when you're going back through and writing, maybe practicing on paper or doing practice problems, review problems, things like that, those things stick out really easily. So you can kind of practice without having to flip through your notes and use all of that time, you know, kind of reading or scanning through all of the text that's there. So again, it's typically engineering classes that I've had, my upper level classes, and then like my Calc 1 and 2 class and differential equations, I had those guided lecture notes. And that's kind of what I thought was most useful with them, was using the pen and pencil during class. And then to review from those guided lecture notes, typically I'll get a blank piece of paper and then write out whatever class problems we did, write homework. So it's all on a separate piece of paper, because sometimes when you're going through math problems and things like that, you kind of start to remember what you already did in class instead of coming up with it and working it out with either different equations, different connections that, you know, you're supposed to make when you're solving a new problem. So that's what I like to use, a new sheet of paper when I'm reviewing, even with these guided lecture notes, to kind of separate it and make sure that I'm learning the material and the method to each of the problems. Did anyone have any questions about other things with guided lecture notes?
All right, well, if there's no questions, we can go on to our next topic then. So as I said earlier, I am a writing tutor, and writing, regardless if you're in humanities or if you're in STEM programs, you have to take some type of writing course while you're at Penn State. So contrary to popular belief, even though it is simply a writing class, it is still really important to take notes like that. I promise you, as a tutor, I get a ton of people coming in just to ask me to explain their assignments and things like that. And at that point, there's only so much I can do to help you if I'm not in the class to see those assignments. So to ensure that you do know what your assignments have to consist of and know how to properly implement the instructions of it, good techniques could be, whether you're in Zoom or in person, taking notes as your professor is talking about the assignment is super important. All the words. Okay. All of the writing courses on campus, all of the professors have to stick to very detailed and strict instructions and rubrics. So all of the information should be posted on there. But when the professor is explaining things, they will be going over more important concepts. So if you see them maybe focusing more on main point 1 or this thesis or this supporting point, whatever it may be, jotting something down like that could help your paper and help you get a better grade as well. Another important thing that you should consider doing when taking notes in your writing classes is writing down questions. This is a very important one that can be used in all of your classes really, but especially in writing. All of the professors had to get like very high degrees to be a teacher here. And that means that they speak in like very high verbiage and they've been doing this for a while. And sometimes that doesn't translate down to the level that we need it to be. So if they needed to give a 20-minute explanation and they gave a 5-minute explanation, so there's a lot of holes in what they're saying, you're gonna have a lot of questions. So writing down your questions as you go to see what you do and don't understand to later ask the professor or even ask tutors ends up being really, really helpful. Another thing to think about when you're taking notes in English classes is writing down ideas. I promise you, if you're sitting in class and saying, oh, I don't have to write this down, I'm going to remember it later, you're not going to remember it later, like 9 out of 10 times. And when it's fresh in your head and you're talking about these ideas in class and concepts are coming up, making sure that you write them down as you go can make the beginning process for projects a lot easier and a lot better too. Because with that, you already have your ideas down, like step 1's done. So you're cutting down a bunch of time by writing down your ideas as you go and as they come to you. Another helpful thing is to go to tutoring. We help with a lot of things. It could be writing, it could be explaining things, even though I can't promise I can explain exactly what your professor is thinking about your assignment, but something like that can really help. And taking notes and then coming to tutoring so we can help you more efficiently helps the both of us get to a conclusion a lot better. And then peer help too. I would just be careful with this a bit, because some professors have different rules about academic integrity. So some encourage collaboration, some don't. So even if you have a friend and you want to compare notes that you take or ideas that you have about a project, especially in writing, those things can be very helpful. But I would just make sure to check in with your professor and their syllabus, because it does walk on the lines of academic integrity sometimes. So it's mostly up to professor preference when it comes to things like that, really. So does anyone have any questions on that section? Alrighty, so then I'll turn it over to Alexis.
All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about your pre-printed PowerPoints. So this is a little bit different from the guided notes that your professor will post. This is typically their PowerPoint slides that they upload before class that you can print out, or and then sometimes they do have blanks in them, sometimes they don't. So a way to kind of attack this problem for note taking, I usually see this more in engineering than any of the other STEM classes. So what I like to do is use a colored pen that's different from the theme of your PowerPoint. So for most of my engineering classes, they are blue and black because they're Penn State themed. That's kind of the structure of them. So I'll use a red pen when I'm taking notes. I will underline important slide titles. I will like star important equations that we're going over. And then if there are examples in the PowerPoints that we do, or if there are blanks, I do use a pencil to fill those in. That way I can kind of differentiate the important parts, and then I can then extract out methods, different equations that I need to know, different relationships, things like that. And I also like to use all of the margins for extra notes, tips that the professor gives for solving problems, different references. For example, when you get up into your last couple years of your major, you tend to refer back to a lot of classes that you've previously taken, or even some that you're taking concurrently. So what I like to do is make a little note, go back and look at IE 323, this example, something like that. And so that way I can go back in my notebook, and if I am doing a homework problem, and I come across, I can't exactly figure out the concept, the idea that we're trying to solve, I can look at my notes. And as soon as I see that little note to go back and look at my other class, it's really easy to go back and figure it out and then solve the problem from there, instead of, struggling to find in your notes just for that class where I'm supposed to be looking at. So along with colored pens and highlighters to kind of like pull that important information out, if you have conceptual information, definitions, simple relationships, I like to make flashcards of those. So I could put either a question or some triggering idea on the front of the card, and then on the back, I put the relationship, the answer to the question, things like that. You can actually make flashcards of more things than just the word and their definition. It's really crazy if you get online and look at different examples, ways to, make these connections between ideas. There's a lot of really neat ideas behind that. When I'm reviewing off of PowerPoints, I tend to, like I said, make the flashcards. And then if there's problems, I go back to the same method as with the guided notes. I take a fresh piece of paper, write the problem out at the top. Any given equation or given variables, things like that, I make sure I highlight them, underline them, write them on a new line, something so that they stick out to me. And then I try to do the problem through the method, not from what I have on my PowerPoint. Another little tip for printing out these PowerPoints, I like to print them 2 slides to a page. One, it saves on our printing on campus, but also I tend to see that a full slide on one page is most of the time a waste, especially like title slides, objective type slides, things like that. And there's a sufficient margin space, there's a sufficient, problem solving space when you have 2 to 4 slides on a page, and you can still read everything very clearly. You can still highlight, make little stars, notes, indents, things like that, to be able to pull information from.
I have,
Anybody?
I have a little extra tip for that.
Yeah.
And if you have a 3-ring binder and you take those 2 slides and you put them on just one side of the page, and then you use the 3-hole punch, what you can do is you have a blank sheet on the back side if you don't print them back to back. So what you would have is you would have your piece of paper that's got your slides on, and then you'd be faced with a blank sheet of paper. So you could actually write on that blank sheet of paper if you have a lot more than will fit in, into the margins and on the slide.
Yeah, that's a great, that's sometimes I typically print like 4 to a page. I try to get as much as I can because typically our problems, are a different example or something like that. And I always have a blank page. I don't know how. I always have blank space that I use for those problems and things like that, or drawing like conceptual maps like Alana was talking about earlier, and being able to link things. Do we have any other questions? All right, well, I think I'm going to turn it over to Alana again.
Hello, everyone again. Okay, so for this one, we're going to go over just general humanities, how I typically take notes, recommendations. Humanities is like a very broad scope of things, so you could use this in multiple different classes. Some may not apply to your classes, but that's okay. We're still going to go over it. So it seems very simple, but it's so effective, especially in going back in your notes and labeling your pages is huge. Whether you label it with the chapter you're talking about, if you label it with the date, if you just label it with the main concept. If you're preparing for an exam and they say it's chapters 1 through 5 and your notes are all disheveled and you're like, I don't know what's chapters 1 through 5, it's going to make it a lot more difficult. And if you're only focusing on like a certain concept, then being able to just flip through your notes and find like a big header that says, oh, whatever, is really helpful when going back and searching and then further studying those notes. Another thing on taking notes in general, taking notes is really important, but we do not need to write everything. I've taken a lot of like education psychology courses, so I know exactly the way that you're supposed to take notes and how you're not supposed to take notes, how you're supposed to study and how you're not supposed to study. If you take notes of literally everything, you're just simply writing more. You're not necessarily learning more. You might be studying more, but then you might be studying the wrong concepts, the things that you don't need to focus on. And it can just look really overwhelming and make you feel really overwhelmed when there's that much information, because these are college classes. It's not like we're going over like Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Like, it's not just that, it's a lot more involved. So taking notes of everything is really an aggressive approach to go through it. And we don't want to do more work than we have to. We want to work harder and not smarter. Or no, work smarter and not harder. Yeah, that one. So with that, if you're in class, if your professor starts like randomly talking like super loud or like slowing down the words that they're saying, that would be something that you definitely want to focus on and taking notes of. Like Alexa said, if you had guided notes, I would print them out before class. This way you can just follow along as you're going. And then I would write in the margins like important things, highlight important things, because you don't need to rewrite the presentation if you already have a copy of it. That's something if as a study technique, if you want to do rewriting things after the fact, but when you're first learning them, you kind of just want to see exactly what you need to know, write your important notes and move on with your life. Another thing that can help is translating notes. So I don't mean translate as in like if they're written in Spanish, write them in English. But translating as in writing it in your own personal language. If you learn better from pictures, then maybe doing little doodles or pictures that will help you remember information. Creating the mind maps again, making meaningful observations of everything and then translating those. So if you see something that reminds you of another thing, like if I see a butterfly and I think of some concept that I learned in education, I would use the butterfly as a symbol for that. And it'll cut down your time on writing. It will help you recognize and remember things more because you're going to instantly recognize this butterfly as this piece of information. And it just really helps your brain to connect all of those bits and pieces. Another thing is highlighting. I know it sounds like a silly and obvious one, but a lot of people make the mistake of just highlighting like the titles of things to make them stand out. And that is really good, but we also want to make stand out the important notes that we take. So even though like subtopics of chapters are important, we also want to focus on the important concepts within those and make sure to focus on that. So highlighting should really be done in the really important information that we want to work on. And it should also be done on information that you don't know yet, because you don't want to just focus all of your notes and information on things that you already know, because then you're just going to further know the things you already know and you're still not going to know the other things. So just making sure that you focus your notes and your highlighting and your important pieces of information on that is really going to help you in the long run. And writing questions again as you're going, not just in writing courses, but in everything. Because you can use those questions to go to tutoring and then office hours too. At least I've noticed like all of my professors in the humanities department have like amazing office hours like almost every single day. So going to them with like specific questions that you have from class, which I promise if you don't write down, you will not remember exactly what you had the question to later, is just really helpful in recognizing your questions and being able to write further notes. Because if you go to office hours, you could also get a more in-depth explanation of what your question was, and you can take notes down on that as well. Yeah, I think that's all I had for this section. So does anyone have any questions on that part? All right, so then we're going to hand it back to Alexis.
Right, so now I'm going to kind of talk about the handwritten notes that you take in your STEM courses and specifically kind of engineering again. So when I was just starting out in physics, chemistry, my Calc 3, matrices, my material science courses, they all have either a PowerPoint or the professor has their own notes that aren't given to us or shown to us, at least until after maybe the class is over. So what I do for my handwritten notes, I just use regular notebook paper and I use a pencil. And what I'll do is I write the date, kind of like Alana was talking about. You can write a heading, write a topic, something like that. But I'll try to write the date. That way I can keep things in order. And then sometimes I'll also number my pages up in the top corner. That way when I'm flipping through my binder, if I take a section out because that's what my homework is on and I accidentally close my binder, I can fit it right back in where it belongs because the pages are numbered that way. So typically I use a pencil, and then as I'm reviewing, I'll go back either with a pen or a highlighter and only touch on the important things and like circle equations that I need or star them, highlight the main topic of that day or maybe the week because we go over the same thing for that whole week. And then excuse me, I also tend to write out every single step that we need. So in matrices, for example, when you're changing every row, you don't necessarily, once you get used to it, write down row 1 times 3 equals row 3. But I will still write those things down, even though I may feel comfortable in the moment. As soon as I close my notebook, get in my car, get all the way back to my house, and eat dinner, whatever. As soon as I open my notebook again to do my homework, I know I'll forget it. It may seem like simple, you can go back and do it, figure it out, but it's just more time that you're kind of wasting instead of doing those homework problems or practice problems, things like that. So I'll write out every step when I'm in my notebook and then in taking my notes in class. But then when I'm doing my homework, it makes it easier to go through it more quickly and, be able to visualize that step instead of having to write it out and spend that time. I also like to go back and do the same method with the other 2 styles and rewrite the problem that we're doing, the practice problem, example, equation, whatever it is, write it on a new piece of paper. It may seem like you start to accumulate a lot of paper this way, but it's nice to have those examples in your notes, kind of like as you're going along and learning the things. But then it's also nice to have the example written out, more spaced out, things like that. And then I also try to keep even margins on both sides, even writing my handwritten notes, just to be able to make those questions or write those questions down that I have, make any notes about important concepts, things that we're going to come back to, things that are relatable to other classes, things like that. And that way, again, they stick out. They're more visible when you're going back through. If you're preparing for an exam, your office hours, tutoring, things like that, you can find them much more quickly that way. Even when I'm reviewing my handwritten notes, I still use the flashcards. I will make diagrams on a separate piece of paper, kind of blow them up a little bit bigger than maybe they were in my notes. That way you can really dive into what you're looking at. For example, in my material science classes, we have a lot of diagrams that show what's happening inside the material at different temperatures. So when I'm originally doing them in my notes, they might tend to feel a little small. So when I'm reviewing, I'll use a larger sheet of paper. Maybe I'll use a half of the paper this time instead of just the little note that I wrote in class. And that way I can blow it up and I can look at it on a deeper level and be able to connect different things as I need to. With engineering, typically most of my handwritten notes are from discussion courses. So like Alana just talked about, really making sure that you're paying attention to things that your professor is really enunciating on, things that they are bringing up a lot during class, things that you tend to maybe start class a lot talking about or finish class talking about, things like that. Whenever your professor is standing up there pondering a question and doesn't answer it back right away, that's probably something that you want to write down, something that you definitely want to know. It might be a key on the exam for you. And then also, I always leave room also if we're defining things. For example, in one of my classes, we were defining what quality really looks like, whether it's a product or a service, what the differences are when you're looking at those. So I will write down what we're talking about in class, and then I might leave a little room after that to go back and see what the book says, possibly Google it and see what that says. Just that way I can kind of take what several sources, reliable sources are telling me, and then be able to form it into a way that I'm going to remember it, going to be able to apply it, things like that, just like Alana was talking about with her notes as well. So as you guys can see, a lot of these techniques you can kind of mold and form to be to fit your school of learning. So whether it's the business school, engineering, humanities, arts, things like that, you can definitely blend these techniques to fit what you need, what's going to help you best. Does anybody have any questions about handwritten notes, techniques, anything?
I have a question.
Okay.
Please raise your hand. How many of you are printing your notes? Like printing versus cursive writing? Oh, I was so afraid of that. Printing takes longer. It really just does. Every time you pick up your pencil off the page and you put it down again, it is, if you know cursive, it is so much faster. It absolutely is. So it's more time consuming to print. I don't know. I don't know if you're all learning how to do cursive in school. I think in some cases it's becoming a thing of the past, but it is a lot faster.
I've learned that shorthands are very, very helpful also when you're taking handwritten notes. And my notes do sometimes kind of look like a blend of print and cursive. It's just how fast I'm trying to go and keep up with what we're learning, but also try to be present in the conversation that we're having. So I do have a small, it's my own font that I've created, but I love shorthand. If you just like Google, simple shorthand, things like that, different symbols, different abbreviations. I always write between BTN, and it always comes up. That's always what I remember it as. Little things like that are definitely super helpful too.
Yeah, coming up with their own shorthand. There's a famous he was a famous scientist named Richard Feynman, who came up with his own symbols and developed symbols that made perfect sense to him. And when he was trying to help some other students and he started using his symbols, the students said, what do those symbols mean? So when he realized that when he was working with other people, he had to use symbols that everybody knew the meaning to. But he created his own symbols and shorthand, absolutely. Anything that will save you time.
And along with the shorthand too, I tend to like leave out articles or unnecessary words. If I'm writing like this or that, I'll just write a slash instead of the or. Simple things like that, I find really save time in class and allow you to like be present and come up with those questions and really think about the material. But it's also really simple to go back and review your notes and study from them, because you're not totally changing the material. You're just adding simple, small changes that cascade into a big difference, I believe. All right, well, if there's no more questions, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Alana.
All right, so for this section, I kind of got a quick insight to education psychology. So just a couple of quick, fast, fun tips that will help you out a lot. This first one, Alexis and I have creative differences on, but it's like scientifically proven that if you write in blue ink, you will tend to remember things better. That's not to say you can't write in other colors like red, like some people named Alexis like, but it does help a lot with you remembering information. I don't know why, I don't know how, but it is a thing. So if you want just a simple and quick way to like remember your notes better and just remember information better without changing everything you do, just write in blue ink, still highlight and everything like that, the important concept. But for some reason, blue ink really helps. So I recommend that. Another thing is whatever environment that you are taking notes in, that you are studying in, make sure that that is the same environment that you are taking the test in. So if I have an exam and I have to go to, I don't know, the library or something, and that's where my exam's taking place, it's best to take your notes and study in that environment, because the environment that you're learning things in, the environment that you're taking notes in, is the environment that you're going to remember things the most. So even if you're just sitting there and you're like, oh, a clock, and then you start reading about quantum physics or something, and then you're taking the exam and you're like, oh, I needed to remember this thing about quantum physics. You look at the clock and your brain kind of remembers, oh, this is the environment where I learned these things. So your brain and your body remember the information better that way. So that's just a quick, nice tip to use. And almost all the classrooms on campus are like open 24/7. So even if you just went to like the classroom, like when there was no class and nobody was in there, you could still do your work and study and everything there. And it's probably a lot better than just doing it, sitting it in your bed or something. And then the same thing goes for Zoom class too, because a lot of us are at home now, or a lot of us are stuck in our dorm, so we don't really have the option to go to other places. So if you're in your house and you know you're taking it in the living room or something, or you're taking it at your desk, I would just make sure to study and take my notes there. This way, the environment reminds you when you're taking the exam, and it helps a lot. This one is very important, and nobody takes it seriously because it doesn't sound realistic. So you should not do any subject studying, taking notes, anything like that, if it takes more than 2 hours. After the 2 hour mark is when you should stop and switch to another subject. I know that doesn't seem realistic because of the workloads that we get, because how much things we have to do and how little time we have to do a lot of those things. But it's not like you have to completely stop. Just if you're doing a psychology class and you have a big exam on Friday, studying or rewriting notes for that for 2 hours, and then stopping and moving on to a different subject. The reason that it's really good and important to do something like this is because the amount of brain power that you have for a certain subject, your attention span and everything mixed together, after 2 hours, that's not a good environment for your brain. After that, your brain starts feeling fatigue, you start feeling fatigue, you don't pay attention as much, and you don't take in more information. So at that point, you're doing more harm than good, because then really that's when you're wasting your time studying. That's when you're wasting your time redoing all these things. Because after the 2 hour mark, you're not remembering this information. You're not taking it in. You're just trying to do what you think you got to do. And again, we don't want to do more work than we have to. And that's really going to end up hurting you in the end. So 2 hours for psychology, stop if you need, take a 15-minute break. If not, just move on to your next subject, do that for 2 hours, and then the process continues. So you can still get the same amount of work done, but break it up by subject. This way your brain doesn't implode on you. And then you're like, I studied 6 hours straight for this exam, I only got a B+. You only got a B+ because your brain can only take in so much information at a time. You really have to just take care of your brain too and treat it as a whole different person. People need to rest, brains need to rest. So just treat it like that, and I promise it will save you a lot of time and a lot of tears over exams. Alexis already hit on shorthand, so I won't go over that again. Just making sure that like you have like quick, small little ways to take notes will save you so much time. Like you're like, oh, it'll only save like 5 seconds. 5 seconds over the course of 4 years really adds up to a lot of seconds. So think of it that way if you need to, in more of a broader sense. Reviewing your notes throughout the week, whether that mean that's up to personal preference. So it could be rewriting your notes, it could be rereading over presentations, it could be writing notes in a different way that make more sense to you, whatever that may be. It's important to review them throughout the week instead of just saying, I have a test on Friday, I'm going to study for this on Thursday. The reason being is because you have a long-term memory and a short-term memory, but your working memory is your short-term memory is. So if you focus on a chart that you had to learn for some class, a flow chart, and you went over one piece of it on Monday, one piece Tuesday, one Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, your brain has more time to process that information, to read over that information, and to look at it, to remember it better. So you might not even have to be prompted to remember that information. Whereas if you do it just on Thursday, it's just going to be in your short-term memory. You're just going to remember the content. You're going to be like, okay, the sky is blue, the sky is blue, the sky is blue, without knowing why. And then right after your exam, it's going to leave your short-term memory. You're never going to remember it again. And then one day in the future, in a different class or your career, when you need it, it's going to be gone. But if you do it day after day, even if it's for 10 minutes, something small like that, 10 minutes for 5 days is almost an hour, rather than just studying an hour at a time on Thursday for your exam. So if you study it piece by piece, then it's going to go into your long-term memory. And after it goes into your long-term memory, that's when it's going to stay there. That's when you've achieved learning, not just memorizing information. So when you really learn, then that's when you're going to do good on your exams. Then that's when you're going to get more knowledge that you can apply to the future. And especially in humanity courses, everything's about application. No matter what it be, it's about learning things and how to use it. And the same thing is for engineering. You guys really need to remember what you're doing, because if you don't, bad things are going to really happen to buildings and everything. So making sure that things are in your long-term memory and not overworking yourself or your brain is really important. And then my last point for this part is creating master documents for your assignments. So I know that a lot of professors will have like a syllabus and then a course calendar and then a description of an assignment, and all of them have like bits and pieces of a particular assignment, which can be really overwhelming to see if you have like 5 tabs pulled open and you're going back and forth between all of them to see all the information. I hate doing that. It's literally makes me so like fidgety and I can't focus on it. So what I like to do is I'll copy and paste whatever assignment it is. So if I have a speech or something and there's like 5 different files for that, I'll make one Google Doc and I'll copy and paste all of the information for it from all of the documents and put it on this one Google Doc. And then after that, I'll go through it and then I'll say, okay, what's filler information? What's actually important? What's repeated? And then I'll edit the doc based on that. So we don't have like 3 pages of him saying like the same 5 bullet points. If he says it once, we can delete it and then keep going. If you see it on your Google Doc that way, or wherever you take your notes, it's easier to see the information that we have to know, whether it be like a review sheet or an assignment, to see the information that we need to know, what we need to apply and everything like that. Seeing it on one document and even the rubric sometimes too can just help your mind get into, okay, here's one piece of paper that I have to follow. This is exactly what I have to do. And then we're just going to do it. The same thing can be said when you're studying too. After you take notes, I normally will rewrite them, but like in human words. So I take a lot of psychology courses, and reading a textbook and reading everything about human development that way versus the way that I interpret it and write it is really different. So I'll have a master doc of just like terms and my definitions of them rather than the textbook, and just having things that are simple in one complete document that are in my own words really helps for further studying and things like that. So that's everybody's intro for education psychology. If you want any more psychology education tips, just email me and I will let you know all of the ones that I have. So that one was a big section. So does anybody have any questions on that one? Alrighty, so then we'll turn it back to Alexis.
All right. So now I kind of want to touch on like lab, article, rubric, report, kind of annotation, and the way that you can kind of pull the most important information from that. So for a lot of my engineering classes, when I have a project or something, a lab that's going to be due in the next week, I typically get a packet that is 10 to 15 pages long, because they want you to have all of the background information, all of the material information, the movement information, things like that. Everything to look at a 360-degree view of what you're studying or what you're going to further look into, things like that, further research. So instead of looking at this document and being super overwhelmed, I always first look for the words abstract, objective, learning goal, something along those lines. And I immediately will highlight that heading, because that way, when I'm flipping through after we talk about it, go over it, things like that, I can immediately go back and say, okay, what the heck am I trying to do? Or what the heck am I trying to solve when working on this particular article, lab, things like that. So I always find the abstract, and then I will kind of read over it briefly and try to soak in the entirety of what we're looking for. Try to make a small list, maybe. Try to kind of connect the different points that we're looking at, and then I will go ahead and kind of fine tooth comb out everything that I'm going to need to answer for my report. So I will underline any variables that were given, any definitions that were given, any important like keywords or phrases, things like that. And then I will circle at the end what we're looking for. Usually what the goal is in the last 1 to 3 sentences of the abstract or objective. So typically that's where I go. It always has the question mark with it. It's a how many, a what, a where question, something along those lines. I always try to like circle it and make that one really stand out from the rest, because the abstract and objective is all important. It's all the most important information, but you really want to know what your thesis is going to be, what your main point is going to be. So I will then use a pen or something to go through and find my action steps of the lab, and then like the main concepts that we're going to be looking at. So those are my first 2 kind of steps to really attacking and pulling apart this 10-page article. I do read through introductions that are given, any background information, history, things like that. But I try not to mark up a lot of that, because I don't want that to be where my focus is if my goal is not encompassing that. So I also typically for my engineering classes, we'll have like an in-person lab, or we'll have a Zoom meeting, something at the beginning of our time, where the professor will go over what we're supposed to be looking at, kind of giving us very slight hints as to where to put our focus on. So as the professor is kind of going over that, I'll be writing in margins, kind of making little bullet points, stars, things like that, and trying to draw attention to that, because it's also sometimes the information that they give you outside of what's physically written in the lab is actually more important than what you can find inside the lab. So make sure that you're kind of like annotating that, writing down what they're saying, but using the tips that we've been giving you. You know, you don't want to write out their entire little spiel at the beginning of lab, but you want to write the most important things, like group collaboration rules, things like that, where your focus should be, how many or what types of data, or how much data you're going to need, different things like that, equations, relationships. And then there's typically always a like questions or deliverables, something towards the end that you're going to need in your report. So I'll always go to that page, and that's where I write like the due date, anything specific that they put or that they say that we need in the lab report, if we need an executive summary or not, if we're going to need different appendices depending on what type of data we're looking at. So that's where I write that information, because that way, when I'm entering all that information into my report, I can see those cues or those little tips that they gave us to know what exactly I need in my report. And when you're looking at an article from an engineering or STEM perspective, it's kind of the same concept, looking at what the subheaders are and then trying to pull the most important information from each section. So I try to go through it section by section, highlight or underlining any definitions. If there's words I don't know, I'll circle them and then draw an arrow to the margin, and I'll Google that and write the definition there. Just little things like that, using all of the space that you have. And then when you're annotating an article as well, there's usually diagrams that go along with the important topics. So if I'm reading an article about different material properties, they'll have a diagram of their melting point or their solidification point, things like that. So that's going to be, more important maybe than a section on if it's shiny or not. So those are ways to have figures and things helping you pull out what's most important in a lot of the articles that you're going to read in your STEM classes. That's kind of all I have for like annotation things. So are there any questions about that?
I have a general question.
Okay.
And to both you, both Alexis and Elena, I just thought of this one, so I'm going to put you on the spot. Now, you've both been here in completely in person, and now you're in this, since March last year, we're approaching a year of the virtual environment. Would you say that your techniques have changed dramatically from the in-person environment to the virtual one? Okay, Elena, how have yours changed?
Well, the way that I used to do it was before class. I would just go to class, like I'd be there, I'd be present, I'd be writing down whatever the professor said. I'd ask questions like during class, after class. Like I'd also like hang out with my friends after class and we'd talk about what was discussed during class. And then after, I would print out my notes, I would go home, I would look over them and everything like that. But now, since the friend aspect has been taken out of the picture, since there's not as much like participation over Zoom, even just going like to print stuff is more of a hassle now than it was. And then just there's a lot more content to learn, and I feel like a lot less time now. Yeah, I feel like a lot has changed. I've been more online note taking, and I've never been like that. Like this was my binder like before of just like all of my saved stuff so far, and that's only from like 3 semesters, not even. And then now I just have like Google Docs of stuff open, and it's just like really quick notes. So I feel like it's harder now to pay attention and be more present. So I'm trying to do more when it comes to things like that, because my Rocket book I got. So I'm trying to do new things to keep me invested and to make sure that I'm doing everything that I need to do. But yeah, it's changed a lot, I think.
I'm going to say the other side of it. I think I've tried to keep everything very the same and very, I guess, structured because I am just a creature of habit. That's what I do. So I've tried to kind of treat Zoom class like a normal class. So I do have some professors that ask that we turn our cameras on. So I'm one of those kids that will turn it on. I'm at least, shaking my head or smiling, letting them know that, I'm hearing them and I'm kind of understanding the material. And if I find that if I'm taking notes on my computer, I am, really less hesitant to open another tab and Google, where can I go get lunch today or things like that. I'm much more easily distracted as opposed to just having only Zoom up on my computer and then having my notes completely on paper. That would kind of reducing the distraction of, being on a laptop and having that as my interface.
I'd say so everybody's going to, and it's a good thing to address things in your own way, but it seems to me as though what I'm hearing a lot from both of you is organization is really key. However you happen to do it, it's absolutely kind of essential, whether you want to do it on virtual Google Docs, however, or if you separate your pages and you've got to have that that organizational structure, whether it's putting numbers on on pages or how you save your files. That organization is really important.
Yeah, I have a folder dedicated to every class that I've ever taken on my laptop, and that's where I save any lecture notes, equation sheets, any of the exams that I've taken, things like that, just in case I would ever have to go back and review it. I have all that information, and it's all easily able to be found, because sometimes professors don't label PDFs and things correctly when they upload them to Canvas. They're a different course name, a different course number, even sometimes they're a different professor's name, things like that. So they can be really hard to find if they're not organized that way.
I feel like we're living in two worlds. I don't know if you do, but I do, because I have a combination of paper all over my desk. And sometimes it's easier for me to find things if it's on a piece of paper. And then yet I use the search function on my computer. And I love that, because sometimes that actually makes it easier to find things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I want the best of both worlds. You know, I can't live without paper, but I also can't live without things on my computer. And so there's a lot of decision making for each and every one of us to figure out what's the best way to do it, you know, to do it for us. And now I've realized that I like to do some things strictly on my computer, and my desktop is dreadful. Like, my desktop is such a mess. But if I can't find it anywhere else, I do a search on my desk, you know, search my desktop docs. And now you can search a word and the document pops up. And so even if I screw up the name of a file, I just search for, you know, whatever a keyword is, and the document will pop up. So, you know, these are a lot of really good ideas. And then you have to think about who you are as an individual. What's the best way that appeals to you, or use the best of both worlds. You know, I'd use the best of both worlds. It doesn't have to be one way or the other. It could be a little bit of both. I'd love to hear from somebody out there. How many people use index cards? Show of hands. Yeah, I'm an index card person too. So how are you using them? Do people just use them as a memory tool? I've used them as a memory tool. Darren used them as a memory tool too.
I use mine for speeches. Like, just like small little notes to, like, when I'm doing a speech, so I don't forget to say everything that I have to say, and I hit all the points that I have to, because like, I'm an ed major, so we have a lot of presentations and lesson plans and everything like that. So index cards help me out a lot.
My daughter was a math major at Barron, and she said that when she got to grad school, she never could have survived without her index cards. So I have a feeling that there weren't words on her index cards.
No, I used index cards to do like the relationships between derivatives and integrals and things like that. So they can even be applied to math without words.
The big challenge I think that we all have now too is, just like Alana said, we're not interacting with each other. So we don't have an opportunity to walk out of class and say, did you understand what the professor meant when he said that? And then you can get together at some point, either in Bruno's, in the residence halls, or you can stock the classrooms and find a place to sit down and study. But I miss that, and I hope we'll be back in person in the fall, but we still have a lot of the semester to go. So I think it'd be great if people would talk to each other in the chat more, like at the beginning of class, the way we used to be able to do. Like if you're in class 5 minutes before class starts, Cheyenne, I'm going to send you a chat message saying, how's it going? Or whatever, if you could just make those connections with students in your classes. The other reason I'd love to see people's faces is we're going to be here in the fall. And if you're going to be here in the fall, everybody's going to look like a stranger. But if we see people's faces, we'll say, well, Alexis, I know you won't be here, but when you see Elena walking around campus, you'll say, well, she looks really familiar. Did I go to that workshop or whatever? Or, we need to create that human relationship. I used to not be real fond of Zoom meetings. Now I look forward to them because I want to see somebody else other than my husband, So think about how you can make connections with the people in your classes. I think that'd be great.